Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirk, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the fantasy football hidden gems for Week 8. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, for Week 8 of the regular season, I scoured the earth in search of these powerful hidden gems in order to complete my already deadly fantasy lineups. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Fantasy Gauntlet, you'll already know that these 6 hidden gems are all brought together to complete the Fantasy Gauntlet, so that I can rain down points on my fantasy opponents on a weekly basis. Now, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you exactly where I found these 6 hidden gems in order to help you guys out to complete your lineups with some players that may not be owned in many leagues. Many of the players that I'm going to mention are going to either be waiver wire guys, or guys that you may not be considering starting this coming week, Week 8 of the fantasy football season. So I'm going to give you my arguments on each of these players, these 6 different players, in order to kind of, build myself maybe a trust with you guys. Because last week's hidden gems, some of them, they're still hidden. They never showed up. But this week, I think we're going to turn it around, and let's get into it. Hey, everybody, how's it going? All right, so to begin Week 8 of the Hidden Gem series, we're going to start out with good old Christian Kirk, a guy that I've mentioned before on this specific series. Now, why exactly am I going with Christian Kirk this week? Well, it's pretty simple in my opinion. Mike McCoy is no longer the offensive coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals, and that's literally been the reason why the Arizona Cardinals have just been terrible all season long. By the way, here it is. This is the Fantasy Gauntlet. For those of you who have not seen this before, this is what gives me my fantasy powers, and this will kind of guide the entire episode to kind of give you an understanding of why I believe, or for a fact know, that these players are going to be outstanding for this week. So let's go ahead and bring this down. All right. So anyway, as I was mentioning, Christian Kirk, in my opinion, because of Mike McCoy's departure, they're going to open this offense up a little bit more. Now, where exactly does that help Christian Kirk? Well, I think with Byron Leftwich as the offensive coordinator, like I mentioned earlier this week, I think David Johnson specifically is going to be featured more, whether it's in the passing game or they're going to give him the ball more on the ground. That is a given, right? Byron Leftwich is a understudy of Bruce Arians, and Bruce Arians' offense consisted of 100% feeding the ball to the running back position, whether that's in the passing game or on the ground. So as soon as they begin to get David Johnson to the level that we all expect him to be, many of us drafted him as a top 4 pick this season, and many of us expected a lot more than what he's done. Yes, he's been an RB1, but we expected top 5 performances on a weekly basis, to be honest. David Johnson's that dynamic, and especially in PPR, where in 2016 he was the guy to almost break that 1,000 rushing, 1,000 receiving yard kind of a season. So as of right now, the way I see it, why is Christian Kirk getting the hidden gem boost for this week? It's because as soon as David Johnson starts to get going, this offense begins to open up. They're playing against the San Francisco 49ers this week, and the 49ers this season on a weekly basis have given up 32.5 points to the wide receiver position on a weekly basis. That is a hefty amount of points, and that's in half-point PPR. So this coming week, with Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, David Johnson, maybe a little bit of Ricky Seals-Jones, I think this offense is going to be a little bit better. Well, not even a little bit better, because obviously it's going to take some time for the Cardinals offense to truly get to that specific standard that they want to be at. But as of right now, the way I see it, they're going to be much improved from weeks prior. They're not going to be getting blown out by 40 points. And especially against a team like the 49ers, who offensively has struggled, but also defensively haven't been fantastic. I think Christian Kirk, who, as of late has performed pretty well. As of the last couple weeks, he's beginning to build a rapport. The last time he played the 49ers this season was his biggest game of the season, where he had a 75-yard touchdown, taking the top off of the defense. I understand many of you may be thinking, where can I potentially start Christian Kirk? I already have 3 great receivers. Well, this isn't technically for you in that case then. If Christian Kirk is a guy that, is already rostered or is on the waiver, you would only consider playing him if you're struggling with bye weeks and or you need a wide receiver 3/flex in a PPR, that is the extent in which I see Christian Kirk having some value this week, and that's where I leave it at. That is the power stone for this coming week. Honestly, the way I see it, I think Larry Fitzgerald will eventually be phased out within this offense. He's still going to make plays on a weekly basis. That's a given. But I think Christian Kirk, by the end of the season, here's my bold prediction. Cursed with knowledge, by the way. Christian Kirk is going to be the number one wide receiver in terms of receptions, yards, and touchdowns by the end of the season. That's my bold prediction coming out from week 8 of the regular season. We've got 8 more weeks, but I think Christian Kirk's able to do it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next guy I want to talk about. The next hidden gem for week 8 of the fantasy football season, we have in front of us Jordy Nelson. Okay, now you may be thinking to yourself, how is Jordy Nelson, specifically a hidden gem? Well, many of us, who perhaps own Jordy Nelson aren't starting him. And to be honest, I think that's a mistake. I wanted to come out right away and let it be known that Jordy Nelson has to start. For sure, without a doubt, in my opinion, he has to start. Now, why exactly does Jordy Nelson this week have to start? Whether that's in a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 spot, perhaps even in the flex and PPR. Why do I believe that? Well, as of this season, and as of the last 4 weeks, Jordy Nelson has been the number one wide receiver on this team, whether Amari Cooper was present or not. Jordy Nelson specifically when it comes to stats. This past week they were on a bye week, but the week before in London against the Seahawks, that team just fell apart. The Raiders fell apart, and therefore Jordy Nelson and everybody on that offense was not able to perform. But the 3 weeks prior to that, okay, so in weeks, what were we? Weeks 5, 4, and 3. 3, 5, 4, doesn't matter. Okay. Jordy Nelson was able to produce a total of 20 targets, 15 receptions, 264 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns, a single touchdown per game in all 3 of those games. So this is the way I see it, right? Jordy Nelson's going to be the number one wide receiver in this offense. Yes, they've been talking up guys like Martavis Bryant and Jalen Richard and Doug Martin. I don't buy in that those guys are going to be the main contributors. I still believe Jordy Nelson this coming week against the Colts defense, a defense that honestly, secondary-wise, hasn't been terrible against the wide receiver position, but I think they can be exploited. The thing about the Raiders, right? They're going to have to throw the ball every single game. That is a given, right? This defense is not good enough. This team is not good enough in order to be able to be up in games and run the clock out with Doug Martin. That's not going to happen. With no longer having Marshawn Lynch, that is not something that is going to help the team. Losing a guy like Amari Cooper, I understand he hasn't been efficient in a very long time, but he's another dynamic receiver that opened up this offense and gave them more opportunities. So the way I see it, especially this coming week against a Colts team that loves to throw the ball and is very, very good at scoring a lot of points. I mean, this Colts team, they've scored on anybody, right? Anybody this season, it doesn't matter. They've scored and they've made it competitive. So the Raiders are going to have to throw the ball. I see Jordy Nelson being that number one guy for this team rest of season for sure, unless they trade this man. I have a lot of confidence in him this coming week, especially. So he is my space stone for the week. On top of it, really quickly, there's a good chance that John Gruden's really trying to throw games. He might call games in order to throw games. Like they may be down 40 points in the fourth quarter and they're running the ball. There's a possibility of that, but I truly doubt it. If shit like that happens, they're paying him $10 million a year for 10 years. That was a $100 million contract. I'm assuming you can't just get away with that and keep your job. So they're gonna have to somehow win or at least be competitive in a sense. Otherwise, why are the players going to show up? Just to cash a paycheck? Yeah, you're going to show up every week, get concussions, cash a paycheck, and then just get your ass beat every week? I don't know. Anyway, that's just my logic behind it. I still like Jordy Nelson a lot, guys, a lot. All right, let's move on to the next guy I want to talk about. Here we go. You ready? The reality stone. The reality of the situation here, okay? I 100%. Last week, I said Jamin, no. I said Jermaine Kearse was going to have a really good opportunity to be a number one wide receiver for the Jets last week. The Jets last week, they played against the Minnesota Vikings, and they were just terrible. They were absolute. Was it the Minnesota Vikings? Yeah, it was the Minnesota Vikings. They were terrible. They couldn't do anything by all means, right? But Jermaine Kearse played. He played in 90% of the offensive snaps, yet he didn't get any targets. He dropped a goose egg. So this is the way I see it this week. I'm back on the Jets bandwagon, but I'm not going back to Jermaine Kearse. I will never go back to Jermaine Kearse. Because here's the deal. Robbie Anderson has not practiced this week. He doesn't look to be healthy enough to even play this week. On top of that, Quincy Enunwa is out again. On top of that, Terrell Pryor is going to be out again. And not to mention, Bilal Powell, the running back, the receiving running back, he is on the injured reserve. He is done with a neck surgery. So who's going to be catching the ball for, Sam Darnold and this offense? Is it going to be Isaiah Crowell? I doubt it. Is it going to be Jermaine Kearse? Well, we know last week, Jermaine Kearse didn't really show up within this offense. So who really did show up these last couple weeks for the Jets offense through all their injuries? It's Chris Herndon, a guy that scored 12 fantasy points each of the last 2 weeks in half-point PPR scoring, a guy that's had a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. This past week had 7 targets, 4 catches, and he was pretty much the most efficient part of the Jets offense throughout that entire game. This coming week, he's going to be featured more and more, in my opinion, because of how thin the Jets are at the wide receiver position. Playing against the Chicago Bears, it's not an easy thing, especially when the Chicago Bears are a pretty stout defense on the ground. They haven't really given up many points to the running back position this coming week. This might look weird, but I'm scratching my face. I have to. So they haven't really given up many points to the running back position this season, especially on the ground. They've mainly been vulnerable in the passing game, in which I think Chris Herndon can be a good, tight end option this coming week. So here's the thing. This is my suggestion on Chris Herndon. Why do I think, or where do I think you could possibly play him? If you currently have a tight end on bye, therefore that would have to be Austin Hooper. Otherwise, the Titans, the Chargers, and the Dallas Cowboys, they don't really have tight ends, right? Or not at least good fantasy tight ends as of right now. So you'd have to either be dealing with the Austin Hooper situation, or you currently have a guy like Jordan Reed, Greg Olsen, Evan Ingram, who are uncertain, right? Or perhaps maybe Ben Watson, guys that are, or who were ranked in my 12 through 17 range on yesterday's tight end video, right? This is the only reason you would ever go and pick up and play this guy. He's not going to have as much opportunity as the guys above. He's not going to get that many targets. I think he's going to be a big part of this offense, especially this week because of how many injuries have taken place within this offense. But I don't think he's a guy that is going to completely take over 20 points, be a monster. He's going to have his touches. He's going to get his targets. And I think he has a safe floor. I think he even has a safer floor than a guy like Greg Olsen this coming week, who plays against the tough Ravens defense, right? Matchup-wise, Herndon has a better matchup against the Bears linebackers and secondary. So I think Herndon this week, because of the reality of the situation of how many injuries have taken place within this wide receiver core, Sam Darnold's going to find a safety blanket. Hopefully it'll be Herndon going forward, and hopefully he'll find some fantasy value this week. That's what I've got here as one of my gems for the Fantasy Gauntlet. Let's move on to the next guy I want to talk about. Here we go. So, okay, now, I understand this may be a stretch, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm not here to go ahead and tell you that you should start, Kareem Hunt as a hidden gem. That's not how this works, right? We're going for deep plays. That's the whole point, right? I'm not going to tell you to start. Yes, I told you to start Jordy Nelson, right? But that is just to confirm that, guys, I haven't lost confidence in Jordy Nelson. I haven't lost confidence within that offense. There is still fantasy value still left there. Now that we're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, all right, I have Dede Westbrook on my screen. But here's the thing. When I traveled to Jacksonville, Florida, in order to collect the Soul Stone, right? The Soul Stone requires a sacrifice of some sort, right? Here's the deal. The Soul Stone this coming week Even though I'm going to be talking about Dede Westbrook, it really has to do a lot with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars, as of the last couple weeks, or the last 3 weeks specifically, have been 0-3. They have been getting absolutely dominated on both sides of the ball, and they haven't looked great at all. Blake Bortles this past week was benched for Cody Kessler. The offense has stagnated. The defense is getting exploited in especially on the ground. They're getting exploited. Lamar Miller, Ezekiel Elliott, Kareem Hunt, they've had themselves some pretty good games on the ground versus the Jacksonville defense. So where does that leave, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are going to be playing in London this week against the Eagles? Well, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars, they're going to fare well. The Soulstone this coming week, it's going to be fantastic. But what exactly am I doing? I'm sacrificing Dede Westbrook. He is on the screen in order to be the sacrificial lamb. Why? Because I think Dede Westbrook may be the only guy within this offense who is not going to be fantasy relevant this week against the Eagles. Now, this might be weird. This is a little different, guys. You may be shocked. Oh my God, what is happening? Yes, I'm stating it right now. Leonard Fournette, yes, he's not going to be there. And TJ Yeldon, I don't know if he's going to be the starting running back anymore. So from here on out, it's going to be Carlos Hyde, Blake Bortles, Dante Moncrief, and Keelan Cole. Those 4 guys specifically, I believe, are going to be fantasy relevant this coming weekend. Now, why? I mentioned earlier this week in my quarterback video, what exactly is London Blake Bortles? What exactly is London Blake Bortles capable of? Well, I mentioned it. I said he's capable of. In the last 3 London games he's played, okay? The last game he played in London was last season against the Ravens. He threw 4 touchdowns. Boom. 0 interceptions against the Ravens defense. The year prior to that, he played against the Colts, in which he had 2 passing touchdowns and 35 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. The year before that, he played against the Bills, in which he had 2 passing touchdowns and an interception. He's 8 touchdowns to 1 interception ratio in London. The Jacksonville Jaguars scored 36 points per game in London. And not only that, in the last 3 games they have played in London since the whole deal in 2011 when they began playing games out of the country, they are undefeated in London. Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville Jaguars this week, they are the Soulstone. I believe of all the receivers, I don't think Dede Westbrook is going to do anything. I think Keelan Cole and I think Dante Moncrief will be able to be relevant this week. Why specifically? Okay, here's my reasoning behind this specific situation. Dede Westbrook is not a blocking wide receiver. In fact, when the game plan revolves around, okay, we need a wide receiver out there to block, well, that's Dante Moncrief. That's Keelan Cole. Those are the top 2 blocking wide receivers within this offense. And now that they've acquired Carlos Hyde, they're going to have to test them out. I understand they're playing against the Eagles, front 7, who is extremely stout. And if besides that Saquon Barkley game, they've been great on the ground. But they're going to run the ball. And what does that mean? That's going to force Keelan Cole and Moncrief onto the field, holding Dede Westbrook to the side. I think those 2 wide receivers are going to be fine. I think Blake Bortles is going to be fine. And I think Carlos Hyde should also start. That's the Soulstone for this week. A little different, but we got to spice it up, ladies and gentlemen. We got to spice it up. All right, let's move on to the Time Stone. Now, here it is, people. It's time. It literally is time, okay? We've gotten to that point. It's a juicy matchup, and we finally have a number 2 wide receiver for the Saints offense this season. Ted Ginn, he did his job for the first couple weeks. And, Alvin Kamara, he's kind of a number 2 wide receiver, I suppose. Last week he really ran the ball more than Mark Ingram, so he's really a running back. So where does that leave Tre'Quan Smith this coming week versus the Vikings defense? Well, it's pretty plain and simple. This is going to be a shootout of a game. The New Orleans Saints passing defense is terrible. They are the worst in the league. They give up the most fantasy points to the wide receiver, and I think the 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback position. The Saints secondary is going to give up a lot of points to Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, and Stephon Diggs. That is a given. We expect that, and it's going to happen, right? They're going to at least give up 28 points this coming week. So where does that leave Drew Brees in that offense? That leaves them with Michael Thomas being covered by Xavier Rhodes, and that leaves Tre'Quan Smith open and available to be a good wide receiver to this coming week. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, can I really trust this guy to start? No. This is a guy that you would only play in a deeper league. If you play in a 10-man league, there is no way that Tre'Quan Smith should ever be an option. Okay, but if you play in that deeper 14, 16, sometimes 12, where you have 3 wide receivers starting and perhaps 2 flexes starting, like I do, there are available spots for guys like this. Tre'Quan Smith this week in a game that is going to be a shootout has a very good opportunity. Now, you may be thinking, what about Cameron Meredith? Isn't Cameron Meredith going to kind of dip into the potential of Tre'Quan Smith? Well, here's the deal. Last week, where Ted Ginn was not available, Tre'Quan Smith played 73% of the offensive snaps, while Cameron Meredith, on the other hand, only played 25%. They right there, last week, determined, boom, it's done. Tre'Quan Smith is our number 2 wide receiver. And a number 2 wide receiver, like I mentioned in weeks past, for a Drew Brees-led offense, is a valuable piece to have. He's a guy that is going to have yards in bunches in the coming weeks. I'm telling you, he's going to. And I especially think because of how good this matchup is, with how beat up the Vikings defense is, Anthony Barr is going to be out. Xavier Rhodes is not even a lock. He's still questionable. Linval Joseph is questionable. Everson Griffin may not play. There's a potential that this defense is going to be, pretty banged up and not be able to perform with a fully strength defense. Andrew Sendejo, the safety, is going to be out. There's a lot of people that are going to be out for this defense, which gives them even more potential for the Saints offense to be able to exploit areas within that defense. And I think Tre'Quan Smith, as a hidden gem, he is the time stone for this coming week. It's time for him to have a breakout game and to begin, his campaign as perhaps offensive rookie of the year. I'm just saying there's a potential, but there's only 8 weeks left, so that's probably not likely. Saquon's a monster. Saquon's a monster. I don't even know what I'm thinking. Let's just put it this way, okay? The fantasy gauntlet has gotten to my head, all right, guys? The Dodgers, I don't even know if they're winning at this point. I left during the 11th inning to record this video, so I'm trying to get back to that, all right? We're 22 minutes in. We're going to be talking about the Mind Stone. As I was talking about my mind being corrupted by this here fantasy gauntlet, we're going to be talking about the last guy, the last hidden gem for this coming week, week 8 of the fantasy football season. We're here to talk about Geronimo Allison. All right. Geronimo Allison, the last 2 weeks, has not been healthy and has not played the last 2 games that the Packers have played in. This past week, they had a bye week, so he's had 3 weeks off in order to heal from his concussion that he got during the game against the Buffalo Bills and to, pretty much heal the hamstring issue that he was dealing with once he came back from the concussion. So here's the deal. Geronimo Allison, going forward, especially in this coming week, I think this coming week against the Rams, it's going to be a pretty intense game. It's 2 NFC teams that are just going to try to outscore each other. It's going to become a shootout, in my opinion. I think because Geronimo Allison is the number 2 wide receiver of this team, he has a very good potential of being fantasy relevant this coming week. And he's a guy that many of you may be sleeping on because, you haven't had to use Geronimo Allison. Maybe he's sitting on your waivers right now. Maybe he's sitting at the end of your bench and you're not even considering using him. Here's the upside of Geronimo Allison. In the first 4 games of the season, Geronimo Allison put up 50, if I'm not mistaken, it's 55 fantasy points in half-point PPR. 55 fantasy points. Hold on, I got to confirm this because I put down 5 fantasy points, but that's not correct, and I know it's not correct. So we're going to have to, goodness gracious, the gauntlet's going to have to come off for a second because, oh my God, the gauntlet's off. My brain is it's perfectly working now. All right, here we go. Allison. Good old Geronimo. All right, so in the first 4 weeks of the season, Geronimo Allison put up a 50.4 points in fantasy in 4 weeks, okay? His stat totals for those first 4 weeks, 15 points, 15.4 points, 9.4 points, 14.6 points, and 11 points. He's been double-digit fantasy in 3 of the first 4 weeks of the season in half-point PPR and full-point PPR. This dude was double digits every single week. He's the number 2 wide receiver on an Aaron Rodgers-led offense. This is just like Traquan Smith in the sense that when you're a number 2 wide receiver on an offense led by a very good quarterback, such as Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees, you have potential unlike anybody else. You have opportunity. You're not only the number 2 wide receiver on an offense, but you're playing with, one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. Geronimo Allison this week, because of his health and because of the fact that the Rams, they're going to score a lot of points. And where does that leave the Green Bay Packers? Well, the knowledge I've been cursed with is that this is going to be a game where Geronimo Allison is going to be featured a lot. Why? Because Davante Adams is going to have number 1 coverage on him. He's going to have Marcus Peters shadowing him the entire game. And with Aqib Talib a little bit banged up still, that leaves Geronimo Allison with an opportunity, to find himself some fantasy value. Where do I see the Rams defense, Wade Phillips, focusing? He's going to focus on locking down Davante Adams. He's going to be focusing on making sure the defensive line and the linebackers, they're bringing enough pressure on Aaron Rodgers. And on top of that, where does that... Sorry. And on top of that, they have to also focus on the idea that, Jimmy Graham, he's been used quite, more and more as the season progressed. So I think the Rams defense, while they'll be focusing on putting pressure on Rodgers, making sure he's uncomfortable, making sure that Davante Adams is not being used, making sure Jimmy Graham is having a difficult time, that all leads to Geronimo Allison having a good week, in my opinion, because I don't think, this run game is so potent, especially when you're down 14 points in the first quarter. The Packers are going to have some trouble, and they're going to have to pass the ball. I like Geronimo Allison this week as my last hidden gem, the Mind Stone. That is all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This is what the plan is as of right now. I'm going to see how that Dodger game ended up. Once that is over, I'm going to be answering questions in the comment section for the next 3+ hours, guaranteed. I will be up till 1 a.m. So if you have any questions, throw them in there and I'll perhaps get to you. Probably won't. I'll probably have to finish them tomorrow because there are over, 400 comments I got to go through. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys.